Welcome along the sail repair session. This is very much a very practical, hands-on session. We've got Blake Anderson here, so welcome Blake from Doyle Sails. Blake actually did a pretty interesting online session for a lot of competitors a while ago, one of the webinars on sails, selection, what sort of sails do you need for the race. So Blake's been sort of, very kind enough to come along. It's going to be a brutal session. All right, this is not pretty sail repairs. This is about sail repairs to physically get you to the end. Our focus is for you guys to finish. All right, you finish this race, you win the race. So anyway, I'm going to hand over to Blake. We're going to swap over the audio. So go for it. Oh look, we were, but Rosie's not here. The only real reminder from Simon Dryden as race director is the documentation. There are so many boats that haven't finished their documentation yet. Now, I'm guessing you guys probably have, but we really do need this documentation for customs, for immigration, for all the de-ratting stuff. There's an awful lot of things that require this information. We give formal information to the authorities on getting through the heads and starting this race. We need that information. The other information that's missing is things like all the crew qualifications, passport information, and the extra stuff. Obviously the compliance things too, the radio inspection certificate, the audits, all that stuff. I don't need to tell you that. But we do need that, right? Particularly for the first few starters. So we need to get you across the line. All right, Blake, over to you.
Thanks, Martin. Hopefully all of you have got these pages I plonked on the seats. This is just to start off the talk, just to go through a few things, what you're likely to have happen. And I just thought I'd try and keep it as simple as possible. I'm sure there's a million other things we can try and do to our boats and our sails, but I've just tried to keep it simple for now. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was spinnakers. We've all got special repair tapes that we want to use for them. Most of you will probably buy your repair tapes from the chandleries. Something I wanted to make sure that you all knew, there are multiple types of repair tapes available. This is the most common one that everybody gets. You get it from all chandleries, Whitworths, and all the rest, especially Sundance around the corner. But one thing I know, especially for offshore boats and wet sails, there's a very big difference in the stickiness of the product. You can all just have a feel of the two. The stuff that I get from a company in Sydney is really, really sticky. And for the stuff you guys are going to do, it's very important that you have that. The one from the chandlery is fantastic for just a dry, quick repair for next day, take it into your sailmaker, happy days. You need this stuff to last a lot longer. So I've got a really good history with that product. All the sailmakers can get it. You get it from Bainbridge. So if you have a local sailmaker that you prefer to use, go in and see them and just request that you get some Bainbridge tape. That's my suggestion, but they'll probably feel the same. It's just a much stickier tape. So the other things that we use when we're going into spinnakers and repairs is we've got PSA. Now that's just pressure sensitive adhesive. It's got a backing of sticky, and it is what we call sticky back. All of the products I cut off the roll rather than on tapes, just so that you've got a nice length pre-cut. So some of the common repairs that we're going to go through with spinnakers and Code Zeros. Most of your Code Zeros are going to be made out of spinnaker cloth or nylon anyway, maybe polyester. So they're very relevant between Code Zeros and spinnakers. So you're normally getting your luff leech or foot tear, so you'd use, as I said, just a pressure sensitive adhesive or sticky back, or the repair tape. I'll go through exactly how you do that later on. So if you've got any large tears across the sail, it's really important to use a larger piece of sticky or the PSA so that you can get a broader range and more attachment to the sail. So I've put in there, as said, use your standard PSA rather than a tape, trying to put a small tape across the sail instead. And cornering breakages, this goes across every single sail. Not many people have them these days. It's normally due to rust. I'll go on to prevention of what you can do to stop it from happening, but essentially we all have it happen. I've got a little sample down here that you can all have a look on later, just to see how you fix that. On with head saws, a pretty common one is the luff tape tear. So the easiest way to fix that is with your basic PSA again. And then the best thing to do is just have a nice bit of hand sewing thread that you can go along the bolt rope. Now, when I say bolt rope, that's just that luff, the bit that goes into the track. If that's not tight, you'll just keep ripping that repair. So I normally just go down to one thread when I do it, so you just leave a little bit in there and just go up and down along the luff just to get it tight right up against the bolt rope. Some of the other bits, you might have a frayed tape, use a hot knife or super glue. When I say that, essentially all I've ever done when I've been offshore and not had one of those little gas hot knives that some of you might have seen, you can get them, they're just a little trigger and pretty much just heat up a little blade. You can use that as a hot knife, but it is pretty messy. So what I've done in the past is I've actually cut the top of the bolt rope just with sharp scissors and just poured super glue into the top. And if you squeeze it together with your hands, I know it's messy, but who cares? It gets nice and hard and essentially just becomes like as if it was hot knifed. So it gets nice and rigid and easy to put back in the track. Leech or foot tears, they're pretty standard. I've got some Dr. Sail here to show you how to fix any cuts in the sail, but also just a basic PSA, just either side is going to fix it. Batten pocket tears or batten breakages. Best way to fix it, again, is just a large patch of PSA. If any one of you have ever had it happen, you'll notice that if you've got an internal pocket or a Dacron pocket going across, you're going to see a bit of batten. So if we go and start putting sticky stuff on there, we are going to then have trouble putting the batten back in. So what I like to do is just get a small piece of something. Most of you will have some scraps like this in your bag, and essentially I just use them to go along the little bit that's broken in the pocket, and then stick everything up over the top. So that way your batten doesn't get stuck as you're trying to put it back in. Does that make sense? So batten breakages, obviously most of you will have spare battens. You'll have sails that you care less about or more about, and you might want to take some from another sail and make sure you can reuse it. But essentially using reinforced tape to put it all back together isn't impossible. But if it's seriously damaged, you might need to just slip one out. Some of the other guys that I've worked with have used boom bag battens. Some people keep the battens in the boom. Don't suggest it. If you can put it downstairs, do so, because I've had them go out the back end. So spare battens is always important. Did you have a question, Martin? I saw you kind of... Yeah, right. So cornering breakage again, and I'll just keep saying it on every sail. It's going to happen on one of them, unfortunately, but there is a way to fix it, and it's quite simple. So your mainsail is very similar to your headsail in that you can pull it up and down a track. Most of you will have luff cars rather than bolt rope, but if you do have bolt rope, you are at risk of the same damage that a luff tape on a jib will have. Essentially fix it the same way. You just put your PSA over the top of it, stick it down either side, the length of the tear and a bit longer, so that essentially the PSA covers the entire tear and a bit more, and then just hand sew where it's going to go into the track. The luff cars, we've all had it. Webbing failure is more consistent with people that have got less cars than more. So some boats might only have 8 or 9 cars. I know the class 40s go very minimal on how many cars they actually have on the battens. It just means that they're loading up. Now, if the webbing is failing or is starting to fail, it will rip if any load gets pulled on them. So essentially that's a pretty common tear. The other one that I don't think I've put in here is when the actual slide will pull away from the sail. So I'll go through prevention of that, but that can be the most damaging one to your sail, because that not only rips out the sail, it takes half the sail with it. So there's an important key to preventing that. But you can essentially fix it just with some PSA either side of the sail. So I normally just fold it straight over and normally put some reinforcing underneath. So you might use your Dr. Sail or Sikaflex to bond a heavier piece of material underneath, but you need something to really build up that thickness again, because essentially you've just ripped out the luff of your sail. How you going? So the other one is the same as the jib. You've got your leech and foot tears and batten pocket tears, and the same with batten breakages. They're all exactly the same. Your mainsail's probably a bit harder to fix the battens, and I would suggest with the spare batten that it is long enough for the biggest batten on your boat. So that would be a full batten on most of your sails. Corner ring breakages again. The other thing is the spreader wear and rigging wear.
Just on the battens, I mean, what's the prep? Do you recommend like stitching them in or?
So Martin's question is just about whether or not you stitch the battens in before you leave, I'm guessing. So I'll go on to prevention of actually stopping it from happening, but one thing you want to make sure of is that those battens can't come out. So there's really only three main ways that people will use or will tension their battens. Essentially, it's just your basic Velcro tongue that will stick into the back of the pocket. The other one will be a lash-in, which most of the newer sails will have, the new gen sails, and especially the Grand Prix edition, or what would be considered the offshore Grand Prix edition, will have the lash-ins. They're just a loop that goes through the back of the batten and then and then essentially through a hole and lashed together. So the other one is you can have rockets, which I very much doubt that any of you will actually have that. So essentially between the lash-in and the Velcros you definitely want to hand sew before you go. So every single batten on the boat should be hand sewn. If you have luff loading battens that go in from the front of the sail rather than the back, not when I'm not actually talking about the batten boxes, but essentially the Velcro stuffers that go that way. You want to put a big pad of sticky back over the top of it before you go. So go down to the sail maker, get someone to make up some dots for you, and every single batten that's luff loading, you want to make sure that you've got a big bit of sticky over it, just so that if anything does come away, you can still hand sew it. When I don't actually have a bit of webbing here, but essentially if you do have the Velcro tongues, your batten will be in here, and all I'm talking about is just through the webbing. So you just go in and out, in and out. The sail's down here, and the pocket's there. So you don't need to go through the sail. You just need to stop the Velcro from being able to pull out, essentially. So you just do it, if as relative to size, that's only about 50 mil. You'll have, your webbing will go to here. You might just hand sew it just inside that bit, so you just get a little bit more coverage on what it is. It really just depends on how much you can actually access that webbing. But definitely hand stitch it if you can. And the lash ends, I actually bought a whole bunch of rings for someone the other day. I prefer for a long voyage to have little baby rings hitched onto those loops. So most of you will just have a Dyneema loop and then just lash-ins between it. I think Rod's boat might be similar to that, where you just have basic Dyneema. That Dyneema is essentially taking chafe from that bit of string. So if you have a little ring in there and you just hitch it onto that, it's a soft point, it's then less likely to break, and obviously gives you a bit more purchase as well. So it's a win-win. But just for the offshore stuff, it's probably important to have something like that you can just hitch on. They're only a little baby ring. They don't need to be that strong. There's no more than about 5-10 grams of it, I would have imagined. Some of the bigger boats probably not. Don't take that one. You might have a bit more. Sorry, Rod.
And you main's got screws in it. You haven't quite figured that out.
On the leech, so Rod's main actually has rocket tension, as I imagine. So they're on the leech of the sail. So there's very little you can do to protect yourself from that thread stripping in the rocket. If you do have it, it's okay. Most of that size boat, especially for your leech battens, just so everybody knows, the leech battens on a sail rather than through battens don't take a lot of load at all. You'll notice when you stuff them in, if you push them too hard, they will get a big bow in them. So there's not actually that much load on them. The through battens are another story. So I would imagine for Rod's sail, that the top of the sail might not have quite the same system as the base of the sail. So essentially the rockets won't take anywhere near as much load. But just as a safety, maybe just put some sticky back on the back and just put a full circle, just sandwich it over the back, and that way maybe 2 layers just to stop if the batten does break through those little lash-ins. The rockets have baby loops that go along the base of the sail, so essentially if you're looking down, the loops go over here, and that's the leach of the sail. So what you'd want to do is just have a big half circle, just cover the whole thing, so that it just keeps that batten locked in. So, is there anyone else with different systems of battens that they're not sure of? Most of you will have luff loading through battens, very safe. Might want one spare just in case of a crush jibe, but essentially they're the safest option for offshore. So as where I was, spreader wear and rigging wear, that you should have just some spare better patches and everything in there. One of the easiest fixes for a rigging wear, which is where you're running rigging essentially chafes through the pockets, is the most common one, is actually to glue some webbing onto the sail. Now, if it's not already glued on, might be worth for some, especially the Dacron sails, to make sure you have. It's no extra weight really, and it's very effective. But essentially, if you do get any chafe, you can just lay a piece of sticky back over the top of the pocket. As again, just put that little bit of cloth there so that the batten doesn't get any sticky on it, and then just glue some webbing or some heavy-duty cloth on top. So the webbing's effective because you don't have to try and manage a big piece of cloth. You can just glue a bit of webbing. I've been using either Sika or I've used this today, and we'll all have a play with that later on. So that was really effective. I was quite surprised at it. The good thing about this stuff, and I'll go on about it a bit later, is the Doctor sail actually comes off later. So if you fix the sail with it and you do a dodgy job, I can fix it better later. So it's a win-win. But it's, from all accounts, it's been quite effective for essentially. I don't have any webbing. I'm kind of annoyed I don't. But if you had your bit of webbing to put on the sail, just a 2-inch bit of webbing, you just run some double-sided tape down the middle, and all the glue can go either side of it. It's not going to be that easy to do on a mainsail, but I would suggest any repairs on a mainsail that you do it in a light air conditions or no wind, if possible. I've done so many repairs on mainsails, and it's really easy while the sail's up to do everything you need to do. So if you do have any major damages, and I should say it especially with mainsails, if you do have any with that, if you're lucky, they're underneath a reef, and you can just reef to that next reef, and you can stick with that until you have an opportunity to do the right thing. Most of the time, it's going to be windy conditions anyway, and it's probably likely that's why you'll be able to do that anyway, and it won't be too much of a hassle or loss of boat speed. So prevention. Spinnakers and Code Zeros, they go hand in hand, the same as the materials. Luff, leach and foot tear, it's normally just from flapping. Most of you will have to have IRC Code Zeros. They flap like hell, and two-handed it's even worse because no one's really re-trimming them. Re-trimming them will help with the flutter if you just pull the tweaker down and get the leach a bit straighter, but it's not really that manageable for what you guys and girls are doing. So I would definitely just crank the hell out of it if you know it's going to be a little bit windy when you put it up. So most people, as you will be fully aware, you can't actually tension a leach line while it's up, unless you're going to go out on a chair or out on the halyard. So you're not going to do that. So before you pull it up, if you know you're going to have really, really windy conditions, just crank the leach lines. It's not ideal, but it's still way better than having the leach fall off because it flaps too much. So that's a big one, and it is the only thing you can do before it's set. Always clear your halyards, check your rigging, make sure that when the kite's going up, that it's not going to cross over and dig into a spreader or anything like that. I've had way too many damages happen where the topping lift got pulled up at the same time, which I doubt is going to happen with two people. But just be aware, once it's up, then you can do whatever you want to do with the rest. Most of you will have spinnaker socks or zips, so you can get that sail up, then play with all the other bits and pieces. So the high-risk manoeuvre is trying to do more than one thing while you're pulling it up. So check your rig before you go. Everybody's going to do it anyway. Don't wear any gloves while you're up there. Run your hands along everything. It goes for every sail, this part, but essentially until you cut yourself, wait until you cut yourself, and then where it is, make sure you put something over it. All of you should, especially the Assy boats, be running bungees onto your So if you've got any lowers or anything, essentially you've got to have bungee between each of them, even down here when it's getting hoisted. If you've got another one up here, which I doubt you will, bungee there as well. So when I talk about that, you're just hitching some bungee about a foot up from where it is. You don't need to be right down. You just want to be close enough that it's got a bigger angle on it, and far enough away that well, really not that far. You only want to have it that much, because if it does dive in between the bungee and the rig, you've effectively done nothing for that, solving that problem. But definitely make sure everybody's got bungees on their rigs. Make sure you've all got your rubber stoppers or anything to protect your spreaders as well. So corner ring breakage, I did want to touch on it. Checking the condition of the ring, rust, cracks or webbing chafe. The main failures I've had whenever I've seen a spinnaker come back in is that someone has maybe got a fractional spinnaker, and the chafe's really like right on the edge, just because it's sitting right up into the fractional halyard point, and most people's jib halyards are only about here. So there's all sorts of metal bits and forestays and things to play with. So your fractional's going to be the one that really is likely to go. Your masthead doesn't really have that much stuff up there. So unless the webbings are on a funny angle, which I've seen a couple where maybe the webbing didn't go back onto itself, or it was just not enough webbing, that's when it will break. But I would hope that all of you have good enough sailmakers that won't be that problem. But if you see any cuts in your webbing, definitely check all your spinnakers before you go. I'm sure you've all got your sailmakers checking it anyway, but if you see any damage, get a strap on it. Make sure you don't just wing it. You don't want to be fixing that. And the biggest problem with ring breakages is it's normally the head ring on a spinnaker, and you will end up with it in the water, and then you'll be fixing it even more. So double check everything. If you have the opportunity, just while you're racing, make sure you're just constantly checking those rings. The chafe is the main point, and you just want to make sure that it's not happening. So luff tape tear, the main reasons that, and you've probably all seen it 10 times before and yelled at your bowman for it, is to always use your pre-feeder. If you don't, it's just going to pop out and it's just going to make life hard for you. Make sure that your luff groove has no sharp points. The only reason they get sharp points is because maybe a spinnaker's gone past it, or somehow halyard's got inside and chafed the tape itself. Maybe a flopper stopper's been in the one position forever, and you've just got some little cuts in the tough luff. Go up the rig, check the track. If you need a new one, just get a new one. It's not worth it, because you could end up ripping half the tape. So if you've got a 3 or 4 year old tough luff, just get a new one before you go. I know that you're all up to your heads with the costs, but it's one thing that will definitely rip a sail if you give it the opportunity. There'll always be the main part they fail is just above the entry to especially the tough luff's main entry to the track. Just the plastic starts to wear away, and that's a point where the sail can actually come back out again. So just have a good look at that. Something I picked up on with a few sails that came in for service for the race. The furler foils are a killer for luff tapes if they're not tightened. Essentially, every join in your foil will have Allen keys or some sort of fitting that you can actually tighten up just to get that track tight. Some of you might have tracks that you can't actually do that, but it's just the only other way to manage it is to actually just over tighten your forestay so that the foil doesn't have an opportunity to open up. So essentially, after a lot of use, the foil starts to bend and it starts to open, joins start getting loose, and what normally happens is you'll see, and if you go out sailing before I'm sure none of you really want to do that, but if you do go sailing again before the race, you'll see, if you do see black lines along the sail, they're normally about that long, exactly the distance to get around the furl, you'll know that is the grease inside essentially rubbing on your sail. So if it's doing that, then it's opening. Because you've got, and when it's this big, you know it's open. I had it on try booking and straight away tightened it all up. Happy days. So it only needs to be 5 millimetres and you can rip the whole tape as you're going up. So tighten your forestays and check your check your foils are all good. Steady pace when hoisting. Yeah, I don't really think you need to worry about that one because you're probably going to be doing it from the cockpit anyway. But just go slow and steady. I mean, it's so important for you guys to just get there with everything intact. So the extra 2 minutes or 5 minutes it takes to pull your sail up, it's a no-brainer. If you've got hanks, it's not a problem. Just go as fast as you want. So sail off the breeze to hoist the sail if possible, if and when possible. If it does lose your time and you really don't want to do it, so be it. But just by cracking away or bearing away and just sailing slightly off the breeze, it takes the pressure off the boat, pressure off the sail, and you're not having it just flog the whole way up the sail, up the foil, sorry, or the track. So luff tape freighted head, I've already mentioned how to fix that, but essentially you want to just be very careful when you're putting it in. It's an extra second just to make sure that it's all lined up. If you're sailing downwind and you do want to have it in there ready to go, just make sure you have enough in the track, a good 300 or 400 mil, just to make sure that it won't be loading up too much. A good way to stop the head from also loading if it is stuck in there is that most people have just a bit of string with a clip, and it's long enough to have the sail go in the track a good 300 mil. You clip it through the webbing in the head or the clip of the halyard itself, and then you can pull halyard tension on that small bit that's in that track, and it essentially takes the load from the tape back to the head of the sail or the halyard itself. So therefore, less likely to have that tape just pulling out. But if you don't need it, just take it out, sail tie it, bring it back, or leave it up there and let it get wet. So leech and foot tears, as same as the spinnakers, it's important to adjust the leech and foot line all the time. The foot lines are pretty, not very likely to flutter after you've pulled it on the first time, but just watch it. If it is starting to hula hoop, or skipping rope, just tighten it up and make sure that it's not. The release sail completely when tacking. Just as little amount of wraps on the winch as possible is the key. We don't want to have it just, anyone with genoas, if you do have any wraps on the winch, it's just going to load up on the spreaders, pop through the spreader, and then you've got a big hole in the leech of the sail. Same goes with jibs. The quicker you can get it across, the less likely the batten pocket's going to flog, hit the rig, hit the satellite, hit the million things we seem to all have on rigs these days. Anyone with cruising boats, there's so much stuff forward of that rig that's just going to absolutely massacre your sail if you let it flog too much. So the other one that I haven't put there is just if you have the ability to furl it up before you tack. Just don't try and tack it as one big sail. Just furl it up as minimal as possible or completely, just to stop it from it being any hassle. And it'll be easier to do it anyway. The only thing that it won't help with is pulling the bow away once you have tacked. So you'll want to pull it out straight away once you have finished the tack. Batten pocket tears and breakage, it's really, as I said, just due to flogging and again, hoist the sail off the breeze so that you can minimise the amount of flogging going into the sail when you're pulling it up. Same going downwind, same pulling it down. And again, with the corner breakages, they're the same as spinnakers. It's always around that chafe. Normally a tack point, your clue and your head probably less likely on a jib, but definitely a tack can be at risk of it because it's there's normally horns and things down the tack that will chafe on it. Mainsails, luff tape tears, same as jibs. You just got to check all your luff grooves, pre-feeders, get them on if you need them, but you shouldn't really have a bolt rope by now anyway. Steady pace when hoisting. If you've got luff cars, as I said, same as hanks, just go nuts. It doesn't matter what you do. Just make sure, if anyone has horns for their reefing, if you do have slides, make sure that you don't have any sail underneath the horns when you're pulling it up, because the number one tear from horns is sail getting caught under, getting pulled up quick. Just as a point for me, I always make sure that whoever's on halyard, they're always pulling by hand until it's no longer possible. You are very unlikely to do any damage to luffs, leeches, anything, just by pulling the sail by hand, because essentially you'll feel it breaking before it happens. Leech is the same. If you're pulling a sail up the rig and you want to pull your leech your leech on for your reef. Make sure your halyard's tight so that the luff's taking load. And then by hand, pull your leech on so that you're not taking any extra load on those slides of the sail. So does everybody understand what I mean by that? It's a pretty basic rule, but some people still get caught up on it or tripped up on it. It's really important to just get the maximum luff tension before you pull anything back. And to that point about webbing failure on your luff cars, that's exactly why it happens. And the other thing that you might want to do is just granny tack if necessary. The reason I put that in is just because it's normally happening in a crash jibe. If you break any batten cars, it's going to be because the boom came across too quick and the head went across too quick and then something shock loaded. The only time that batten really takes a hell of a lot of load is when there's actually no pressure in the sail. So it pushes forward through a jibe, and then once you're out of the jibe, it slams all of that load again sideways. So batten goes in, jibe normally breaks a car if you do it really badly, and the batten at the same time. So if you can granny tack, if it's over 25, 30 knots, I would do it every time. Two people, two-handed, it's a no-brainer for me. I don't know whether Martin or Paul ever had to do it, but I'm sure they'd agree. He's nodding. That's good. Okay, so I'm pretty much just going over the same stuff there, so I think we should get into a few of the details about repair stuff. Does anyone have any questions before I go into the bits and pieces?
So I think the summary of most of that was be paranoid, look after your gear, don't try and do everything fast, just be really, really careful.
Yes, be careful.
Because it's easier to not break it than to fix it.
Exactly right. It is a lot easier to it's a lot easier to save it than fix it. Exactly. I mean, you just got to make sure that everything you do is conscientious of the fact that there's a lot of load. Doesn't matter whether it's a 30 footer or a 36 footer or a 50 footer. There's still a lot of load, and it's all relative to what's been put on the sail. So, Red Jacket doesn't have to look after the sail any more than Allegro. It's all exactly the same amount of loads rated to whatever it is. So theirs might be rated to 3 tonne, yours might only be rated to 1 tonne. But all of the parts that are on the sail are still rated the same for that same boat. So it's all relative. So you've still got to take care. Doesn't matter what size boat it is. You can't just go throwing it around.
For example, last race I did with Paul, and it was 40 knots on the nose, and Paul made a call to pull the main down because it was so reefed down. It wasn't doing a huge amount anyway.
Yep.
But it was the leech was fogging, and it was just like made a call that it was more important to save that main than to ring out another knot or two.
Yeah. And you're right, and it's important to change down as soon as you can. I mean, everybody's worried about the race, but at the same time you've got to get there, and we keep saying you've got to get there, but you do. If it means that you're going to spend an extra hour with a slightly smaller sail, but you can see something coming in the forecast or whatever, just do it. It's going to take you 2 hours anyway. So I remember I did a Hobart on Halcyon, and we had, I think we were 1 or 2 short, and we saw a big rolling cloud. It was about 3 or 4 years ago. And I said to the guys, this is coming. It will be here, and it's going to take about 2 hours. And they said, we'll do everything in about an hour then. And I said, no, we're going to do it now. And it was almost an argument, but I said, I did it anyway, so I started doing it myself. But by the time we got it down, we had 10 minutes before it hit. So all we did was reef and put a 4 up. And I just thought, well, imagine if we had have just waited that little longer. And that's with a full crew. So if you see a cigar, just start doing things straight away. Don't wait for it to start coming and see whether it's taking as long as it would have been expected. Just change down, like Martin said. I guess there's probably not a lot more about prevention than I probably can think of at the moment, unless anyone has any questions about some serious damage they've done in the past.
So you were just talking about it being in high winds that you get into trouble.
Yep.
In the dolphins where you've got swells and no wind.
100%.
The boat's slapping all the time.
The flop,
We
yeah.
really drop down and completely.
Yep. Yep. And
we 3 times we had to shorten the main halyard because of the chafing.
just the wear on the sheave. Yep. And some of you will have cranes that go all the way out, and your halyard's that close that it'll actually chafe on the base of the crane as well. There's a lot of things up there that can go wrong. And you're right, and everybody should know it. You've got to always move your halyard up and down, not just for the sake of the halyard itself, but also for the sake of the sail. So last year in the Hobart on Hoodspar, we did like 3 days in 39, or two and a, no, it was less than 3 days because it didn't even take me that long. It was only a day and a half with the 25 knots, but it was 25 to 30 and we're pretty much on that same jibe the whole time. And you could just see, even though we had nice smooth spreaders, the sail was just starting to slowly push through it, and you could see a bit more poke and a bit more poke. So every time I came on watch, I just took responsibility as it was my job to do it. I said, I'll be the one that moves the halyard up and down. So I ranged your patch should be at least that big underneath the sticky back that you all see, but most of you will have nice big patches. So if you move it down that much the first time, then that much the next time, you can pretty much do the whole range for 3 watches or 6 hours, and you'll be able to go back up to the other point afterwards. So yeah, for the same reason, definitely move your halyard around just to save the sail as well. It just moves all the wear points. The other thing that I did forget to say was I hesitate to say it because someone did it the other day and broke a boom because they took me literally. Your vang's really important with wear as far as letting a sail creep over the top of a spreader itself. If you don't have any vang on, it will just blow out, lift the leech and bag up the sail and push it right on the rig. So minimise how much vang you let off, but at the same time hold it in your hand, because if it's 25 plus, you're going to need to be able to let it off. But essentially just try to minimise how much the sail's just sagging on the rig. Most people just ease the sail out, leave it, happy days, that's out, we're downwind, ease it out. But there is control on that leech to protect it from pressing too hard on the rig. So especially if you've got diaphragm rigging, if you've got through battens and diaphragm rigging and you have way too much vang off, it's just going to push it all into the rig and it's just going to chafe the hell out of your pockets, and you'll be up there fixing them all day, every day. Whether you got webbing or super strong Kevlar patches or whatever, it's just going to wear straight through. So I think Paul had did you have rod rigging or diaphragm on your boat? Yeah.
Just to re-emphasise, most boats will have brand new mainsails.
Yep.
And probably the biggest issue will be wear on your spreader patches.
Yep.
You'll have used spreader patches and new mains. And from our experience, after the first day, you'll be up there putting patches on.
Yep.
Especially if you get a blow from a southwesterly coming out of the heads. My advice is have double the amount of Kevlar, just Kevlar.
Yep.
Don't use anything else for spreader patches, and lots of them.
Yep.
So probably double what you think you'll need because you'll use them. Because the biggest killer we found was probably spreader patches.
Yep.
It's a killer.
Got to have some spare ones on the boat, no matter what. Just get a whole set of exactly what you got.
Allow, every 3 or 4 days, if you get a lot of running, you'll be up there doing spreader patches.
Yep.
It's a big killer.
And it was easy to put on while it was up, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so, often when it is light, you get a really light wind, you pull your main down and have a look at it.
Yeah.
We would go right over the main.
Yeah.
While we're at sea, just put it up in.
Yeah, and as I was saying to Martin earlier, I even put sail numbers on a boat that took delivery too quickly, and I had to go down to the boat, and actually it was easier for me to just do it in no wind and put it on. So you can do a million things with it up, but with it down, you've got to manage where you put it, take all the cars off, do everything. So don't even try to take your main off if you've got love cars and repair it unless it's so bad that you have to. If you can manage that tear or reef, that's the way to go. But yeah, definitely spreader patches. I mean, you can get a really heavyweight Dacron now with a PSA as well, which is almost as effective as the Kevlar that we used on Paul's, but you can't go any less than like 8 or 9 ounce Dacron. So it's got to be almost heavier than what your actual sail is, or else it's not worth doing. So, but yeah, definitely have a minimum of 2 layers of Dacron being either side, and maybe especially for your third reef or second reef, and your full sail, they're probably the 2 that you're most likely to. Well, they're all probably likely, really, given that you're two-handed. But just see which one maybe you might know which one you use more, but definitely put them on those ones if you want to minimise how many patches you put on. Okay, I think that's all losing out of my head. I'll start to rabble on. So I didn't bring everything that I would normally put in a repair kit, because as I was doing it, I realised that all of you have different types of sails, and I would spec them for different types of boats. So what I did bring was just the basics of what you can do. I've shown you the PSA, those Spinnaker repair tapes. Where do they disappear to? Someone's pocketed them, haven't they? That's all right. So you've got your basic Spinnaker repair tapes. They only come in this size. So that's why they're not really that usable on major repairs. You all notice the difference of the adhesive on that one. It's more obvious to me because I'm biased. But if you do have it, it's fine. It's just, as I said, it's less. It doesn't stick as well, so you might need to use more of it. But I think on Caddy, I ended up putting about 8 rolls of this stuff on there, and it's 15 metres to a roll. So, and they used it all up. So you don't want to have to use it all up, but if you did, you want to make sure it's available. So, but as I said, that's Bainbridge, and it's a very good product. So I've got a couple of repairs that I'm going to go through. I like to have a few things just made up, and I always do it for. What I have done in the past is more a double-sided tape, and I'll show you that next. So essentially just pre-made patches. So like the most likely tear is going to be maybe across the head or something like that. So I normally make them about 1.5 meters, just depending on the size of sail. And that just gives you a couple of pre-made patches so you can just plonk it on if you had to and not have to sit downstairs cutting it out. But essentially the best thing you can have is that PSA. This one's a super sticky one. It's called US White Sticky Back, same company, Bainbridge sells it, and it's the stickiest stuff on the planet. I've put sails back together with this millions of times, and it's still way better than anything else I've used. It's very effective. I normally cut for my customers, around 0.5 metre, and it's 1.5 metres long or wide the roll width. So I just cut it across the roll and just have pre-cut bits again, and it just makes it a lot easier. I had some chafe from probably one of the most common ones is when you're reaching or running with your main all the way out, and it'll chafe. The sheets will likely chafe rather than just on the boom. It'll actually chafe on the bottom of the main as well. And we had like 1.5 meters of chafe, like a proper square metre of it on Hootspar, and I just literally just got this PSA and just had some strips, and I just, while it was up there, just kept running bits across it, and it worked really well. It stayed together. The guy at the loft at the end in Sydney told me I was a pain in the bum, but it worked and kept the sail together. We still used it for Hobart too, so that's a win. So the other one I've got here is this Dr. Sail. I got to be honest, I only used this today. I've been going on about it forever, but I had a bit of a play with it today, and you're all going to get to have a go. Hopefully I can get one person from each boat and you can just see what this stuff's like. Essentially it's just like an epoxy. It's a shear glue. I was just working that out with Bill over there. So essentially this stuff, if you want to take it off after you're done, it peels off. So I did a little repair myself. Don't comment. It's not fair, but essentially there was a big hole or a slit straight down the middle, and I just put this patch over the top of it. So the big black patch along there is what I use with the Dr. Sail. If you go online, Harken have a couple of cool videos, but if you Google Dr. Sail, it shows you how to use it. But essentially it's just like the expensive version of Sikaflex, but it is really effective. So it dries in like 8 minutes and dries. It actually you can put it on wet. So that's probably the most important thing. If it's a jib and you want to be able to put it on, fix it, even if it is just like a foot tear, you can put a whole heap of glue on it, just patch it on and just rub it on, and you can do it while you're sailing. So that's a bit of a win. The Sikaflex just gets very, very messy, and it gets very hard to do. So I think one of them's about $40 or $50, but you can get big tubes for big boats, and you can just get a box of it. No, it's I think it's $150 for the other one. I looked it up on Deck Hardware. So Deck Hardware sell it, we sell it, everybody sells it. You might get it cheaper from Deck Hardware than me. But yeah, you can get these big tubes of it. It's got multi-purpose. So essentially, even if you had a hole in your boat and wanted to fix it, you could use this to stick on the side of the hull. Probably not your boat. You're probably game over, but I don't wish that on you. That's terrible to say. But if you did have any small holes, I know the guys on Balance, they're like the advocate for this stuff. They've used it a million times. They won a Hobart using it. They had a hole in. They had an issue with their rudder outside their rudder bearing. There was a bit of water coming in. They just got that stuff, squeegeed it around it, and it was happy days. Never saw a drip of water afterwards. So there's some extra uses for it. So if you do have some big bottles, there's more that you can use than just that. But I think it's a bit permanent once you open it. That's all gone. The guys on Balance actually in the Hobart blew out their mainsail and had a couple of tubes of it on the boat. Had some repair stuff just like this and just covered it, their whole mainsail. They came in, I don't know whether anyone's seen any photos, but there's just like patches all over the back of the sail where they'd done a crash jibe and the whole leech just came away. So something I found with this stuff, it works as with pretty much any material. So if you had a leech break, you could actually glue it to the leech of the sail as well. So if you had the tear go all the way across the sail like that and actually break through the back end, you could put that on there, and if you just had a bit of double-sided tape on that inside, you could actually glue along the inside of that, and I'll show you how to do it. And you'd essentially just put a new leech tape on, which, if you're going to have a crash jibe, that's a very likely scenario. So I think the other basics is just your hand sewing thread. Every boat should have a spike or two. You might need a few more on the heavy boats because you'll actually blunt them going through some of your stuff. So good pair of scissors. To be honest, the best pair of scissors for a boat is like household scissors from the supermarket. They're really, really sharp. You're only going to need them for a few weeks, hopefully. And essentially, you're only going to use it once or twice anyway. So once you're done with them, they get all rusty anyway. So don't go and spend hundreds of dollars on scissors because they tell you they're this fancy stuff. Just buy the basic household scissors and that'll do you. Or get a sail repair kit from your local sailmaker. So other thing, just a pen. This is just to mark any holes or anything that you've seen. That way when you take it back downstairs or try and see it later, you'll actually know where it is. If you've got black sails, get a paint pen so you can actually see the paint.
In the previous session, they said the pen was really handy for crossing across the cut. Like you got a big rip.
Yep.
Trying to align it and actually give you the alignment.
Yeah, it gives you little nick marks. Yeah. So when we stick up sails, we actually plot little nick marks in the sail. So if you want to do a repair on a damaged sail like this, especially, you can essentially, like Martin's saying, just do like a little match-up line so that when you're downstairs, you're not trying to... So it's probably more important to do that on a spinnaker, especially, just to give you something to line up.
Yeah, we had a rule on that, didn't we?
And it just keeps you in check, so you don't start stretching one side more than the other. So if you just pin out one little bit, do a few nick marks. I might even just show it when we do this over here. So we're going to fix a spinnaker first, I think. We might get a bit more hands-on. Has anyone got any questions before we start?
What's the Sikaflex product you're talking about?
Just any basic household Sikaflex.
Yeah,
Just your silicon buddy. No. Just actually 3M have a product that you can use that's a spray. That wouldn't be that bad, but I would definitely put some PSA over the top or some sticky back over the top once it's done. I haven't used it before. Yeah. If anyone's used the spray before, I hadn't. Good point. Might try it. But yeah, 3M have a spray if anyone wants to try that out. But I think if anyone's a bit unsure about any of these products, as I said, the basic way to fix a sail is just a piece of sticky back, lots of this, and just in and out. I don't like it, but I'm too much of a perfectionist. But this is the basic way to fix a sail. Any time you think it needs a little bit more strength, just bang another stitch in it. So I'll show you down here just a few things first. So we'll start with the clue webbing, then we'll go onto the spinnakers, and then we'll go onto that nice big... Yeah, you guys can stand around. Hopefully you can see. I'll move those tables around so you can see a bit more. I could probably do this one on the table so that you can all see it.